You thought the silence meant God forgot about you. You thought the delay meant he changed his mind. But can I tell you something? That interruption that caught you off guard, that shift that turned your world upside down, it wasn't the enemy. It was God. Before he sends you into purpose, he will interrupt everything that gave you comfort but kept you stuck. Because God doesn't bless the fake version of you. He doesn't anoint the mask. He doesn't commission the person you're pretending to be just to keep people around. So he comes for the version of you that survived, that coped, that built routines to avoid dealing with what's underneath. He doesn't knock politely at the door of your life. He tears the roof off so he can reach the part of you that's hiding. He'll interrupt the relationship you idolized, the job you depended on, the circle you surrounded yourself with to validate you. He'll shake what you thought was stable, not because he's cruel, but because he knows you're too precious to stay where you are. There's an assignment on your life that requires the real you, the broken, healed, processed, called, tested, crushed, anointed version of you, and maybe you're sitting in the middle of that interruption right now. Maybe you're asking why the people you counted on walked away. Maybe the opportunity dried up, the door slammed shut, and your hands are empty. But God is saying, now I can fill you, now I can use you, now I can send you. Because calling doesn't come to the comfortable. It comes to the available. It comes to the surrendered, and sometimes you have to be stripped to be ready. You have to be empty to carry what he's about to pour. You prayed for destiny, but didn't realize destiny first looks like disruption. You asked for purpose, but didn't know that purpose requires a process. He didn't come to harm you, he came to align you, to remind you that you were never meant to build your life around what you could control, but on what he could transform. So if he interrupted your plans, it's because his plan is better. If he broke your rhythm, it's because he's giving you a new sound. If he shut a door, it's because there's a whole kingdom he's about to open up. You don't have to understand the interruption to walk in obedience. You don't have to like it to grow from it. All you have to do is trust that the same God who disrupted your life is the same God who will direct your future. And when he sends you not the version the world liked, not the version that played small to fit in, but when he sends the real, risen, refined you, hell won't be ready, because before God sends you, he will interrupt you, and that interruption is holy. Divine disruption always comes before divine assignment. That's not just a statement. It's a pattern of heaven. When God gets ready to shift your life, he doesn't consult your calendar. He doesn't ask for your permission. He shows up in the very rhythm you've been depending on, and he interrupts it with purpose. You may not even recognize it as divine at first because the interruption often doesn't look holy. It looks messy, unexpected, painful. But that's the thing about God's hand. It's strong enough to shake your foundation without letting you fall apart. He knows that before he can send you, he has to break you away from what's been holding you back, even if that's your own mindset. And sometimes what's holding you back is the very thing you prayed for in your last season. You prayed for stability, so he gave you a routine. You prayed for community, so he gave you people. You prayed for provision, so he gave you a job. But then, just when you started to settle in and think you could stay there forever, he stepped in and started shaking things up. Why? Because divine assignments aren't birthed in stagnant places. God doesn't anoint you for convenience. He anoints you for change. And change doesn't start with applause. It starts with interruption. It starts with discomfort. It starts with him flipping the table you set for your own comfort, so he can prepare a table that reflects your calling. God will often allow life to interrupt what you thought was working, not to punish you, but to promote you. There's no growth where everything is predictable. There's no dependence on God when everything is under your control. So he breaks your patterns to build your faith. He interrupts your process to ignite your purpose. That's why sometimes your interruption comes through loss, through heartbreak, through failure, through a door closing that you were sure was going to be your breakthrough. And in those moments, it doesn't feel like God is anywhere near, but that's when he's closest. When the version of you that could live without purpose is being stripped away to make room for the version that can walk in destiny. The divine always breaks into the ordinary in disruptive ways. Look at Moses. He was on the backside of the desert, tending sheep, living his everyday life when God interrupted him with a burning bush. Look at Mary. She was engaged, preparing for marriage, thinking her life was going one way. And then heaven showed up and said, "You're carrying something greater. Look at Paul." He was on the road to destroy what he thought was wrong, and God interrupted him with light so bright it blinded him, because sometimes you have to lose sight to gain vision. These stories aren't just ancient, they are archetypes of how God moves. And if you are feeling interrupted right now, you are not disqualified. You are positioned. You are not overlooked. You are being seen differently by heaven. You are not abandoned. You are being prepared to be sent. But here's the hard truth most won't tell you. The interruption doesn't feel holy while it's happening. It feels confusing. It feels like betrayal. It feels like you're being torn from everything that made you feel safe. Because you are, but it's not for your destruction. It's for your development. You can't be sent into something new carrying the weight of something old. You can't walk into rooms ordained by God with wounds you refuse to let him heal. So the interruption comes and it exposes the areas you've been ignoring. It highlights the pain you buried. It pulls back the curtain on the part of you that's been surviving in silence. And in that raw, uncomfortable space, God begins to speak. Not with noise, but with clarity, not with chaos, but with purpose. This is the part where many people try to retreat because the interruption shakes the identity they've built. It pulls down the persona they created to feel strong. But God is not interested in who you pretended to be to get through life. He's after the real you, the you that's been buried under expectations, the you that's been hiding behind accomplishments. The you that cries when no one's watching but still gets up every morning because you know something greater is pulling you forward. That's the version he interrupts, that's the version he calls, that's the version he sends. But not until he breaks the silence with a moment that makes you question everything you thought you knew. Divine interruption is not a delay, it's an invitation. It's God saying, I see you where you are, but I refuse to let you stay there. It's heaven's way of introducing you to a part of you that only pressure can reveal. It's a shift in your atmosphere, a divine collision between what was and what will be. It's messy, but it's meaningful. It's disruptive, but it's divine, and the moment you stop resisting it and start leaning into it, that's the moment heaven begins to open. Not because you're perfect, but because you're ready to be poured into. God interrupts comfort to awaken calling. It's never in the places where you feel the most secure that purpose is born. It's in the places where you feel unsettled, exposed, undone. You can't pray to be used by God and still expect him to leave your comfort zones intact. Comfort and calling don't live in the same place. One is designed to keep you safe. The other is designed to stretch you into becoming. So when God begins to stir your atmosphere, when he starts unsettling what used to feel like home, it's not because something's wrong, it's because something's waking up. You may have spent years building a life that made you feel stable. You aligned yourself with routines that made you feel in control. You created patterns that helped you avoid pain, environments that protected your insecurities, and relationships that affirmed your dysfunction. But then God comes in and disrupts all of it, not out of cruelty, but because he knows that your comfort is slowly killing your calling. You've grown so attached to what's familiar that you've mistaken it for what's fruitful. But God doesn't bless what keeps you safe. He blesses what makes you grow, and so he begins to disrupt. He pulls you out of the room where you were celebrated for being quiet and places you in a space where your voice is required. He removes the people who applauded your complacency and replaces them with silence so that you can hear what he's really saying. He shuts down the path you were building because he knows it's leading you somewhere too small for what he's placed inside of you. Calling doesn't rise in the spaces where you're praised. It rises in the spaces where you're challenged, where you have to rise to the occasion, where you have to walk by faith because everything familiar has fallen away. We've been trained to avoid discomfort. We think that if it hurts, it must not be God. But the truth is, God often speaks the loudest through discomfort. He'll let you feel unsettled, not to punish you, but to push you. That ache in your spirit, that longing for something more, it's not frustration, it's divine invitation. It's heaven knocking on the walls of your comfort saying, there's more in you. But more can't emerge in ease. More requires movement, more demands surrender. When God begins to awaken your calling, he starts with the spaces you've stopped growing in. He highlights the conversations that no longer feed you. He dims the spotlight on what used to make you feel validated because he's trying to get your attention, You were never meant to blend in with what you were called to shift. You were never meant to stay in the shallow end when you were built to swim in the deep. But he can't move you until you stop worshiping comfort. You've made an idol out of ease, and he's coming for it. Not because he's angry with you, but because he refuses to let you miss your destiny for the sake of staying safe. The awakening doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with loss. Sometimes it comes with walking away from everything that once made you feel seen, because now you see yourself differently. When God starts moving you, it won't always make sense to the people around you. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right, because you can't respond to divine awakening and stay the same. Something inside of you will start craving more. More depth, more truth, more alignment, and that craving will pull you out of rooms that no longer fit your purpose. You'll start feeling like a stranger in places that used to feel like home, and that's not rejection, that's elevation. Calling doesn't care about your timeline. It won't wait until you're ready. It won't wait until you've figured everything out. It won't wait until the money's right, the job is perfect, or the relationship looks like a fairy tale. It comes in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the transition, in the middle of the unknown, and it calls you out, not softly, not gently, but loudly, unapologetically. It breaks your sleep. It disturbs your peace. It interrupts your comfort because comfort was never meant to be permanent. It was only supposed to be a season, a place to rest, not a place to root. You've been praying for elevation, but you didn't expect excavation. You didn't expect God to dig up what you buried. You didn't expect him to expose the cracks in what you called strong. But he can't send you where you're going with the weight of who you were. He's waking up the parts of you that forgot they were anointed. He's resurrecting dreams you laid to rest. He's reigniting vision that life tried to dim. But first, he must unsettle your norm. First, he must awaken you from survival mode. This is not just a disruption. It's a divine disturbance, a holy agitation, a sacred breaking of the soil so something greater can grow. You've outgrown where you are, and God is not going to let you shrink to fit. He's expanding you. He's stretching you. He's calling you out from behind the curtain. You can't hide anymore. You can't stay silent anymore. You can't pretend the stirring in your soul is just coincidence. It's not, it's calling. And it's time to answer it. When God interrupts your life, he does it with precision. It may not feel surgical, but it's intentional. It may not look orchestrated, but it's divine. There's something about his interruption that strips everything away until you're face to face with the truth you've been running from. The truth about who you are, about who you're not, about what you've been carrying and what you need to let go of. He doesn't interrupt to expose your weakness. He interrupts to reveal your strength. The version of you that can handle where he's taking you can't emerge until the version of you that's been surviving finally sits down. And often it takes a divine disruption to make that happen. So you start noticing the shift. The things that used to fulfill you no longer satisfy. The places that once felt like home begin to feel foreign. You look around and wonder why everything feels different, why nothing seems to fit. That's because you're being unwrapped. God is peeling back the layers that life, trauma, and insecurity wrapped around you. You've become so used to adapting that you've forgotten who you were before life taught you to shrink. But when God interrupts, he reintroduces you to yourself, not the polished version, not the performance. The real you, the called you, the anointed you, the chosen one that's been hidden behind expectations, disappointments, and fear. This isn't a random shake-up. This is sacred preparation. He's preparing you for what you prayed for. You just didn't know that preparation looked like pain. You didn't know that growth would come through grief. You didn't know that elevation would feel like exile. But the truth is, there is no sending without separation. There is no platform without pruning. God will break your heart to break your pattern, because some of the things you've been attached to can't go with you into your next. And before he sends you to lead, he must separate you to listen. Before he gives you a voice for others, he has to silence the noise within you. It may feel like you're losing everything, but what if you're really gaining clarity? What if the disruption is making space? What if the silence is training your spirit to hear in a new way? You've been asking God to speak, but he speaks clearest in stillness, and stillness doesn't always come willingly. Sometimes he has to take everything off your plate just to get your full attention. He's not interested in your multitasking obedience. He wants your full surrender, because the weight of your next assignment requires a depth of focus you can't access when you're still clinging to the last season. And it's okay if you feel confused. It's okay if you feel like you're walking through darkness. Faith isn't about knowing every step. Faith is about trusting the interruption even when it doesn't make sense. It's about staying the course when everything familiar is crumbling. The interruption isn't the end, it's the middle. It's the uncomfortable in-between where identity is refined. This is where God does his best work. Not on stages, not in crowds, but in caves, in isolation, in transition, when no one else is clapping and you're not even sure what to celebrate. When you're stripped of what you thought you needed and all you have left is a word from God that hasn't come to pass yet. You're not being punished, you're being positioned. This interruption isn't a detour, it's the direct route to destiny. God doesn't make mistakes in how he prepares his vessels. He knows what you need to lose in order to carry what he's about to give. He knows what has to die for something holy to live. And though it hurts, though it feels like you're unraveling, the truth is you're being rebuilt, stronger, wiser, deeper, rooted in something eternal instead of something temporary. There's a version of you on the other side of this that will thank God for the interruption. But right now, you may feel the breaking before the blessing. You may feel the silence before the shift. You may feel the warfare before the wonder. But none of it is wasted. He's teaching you how to trust what you can't trace. He's teaching you how to stand without applause. He's teaching you how to carry his glory without craving validation. And the world may not understand why you've pulled back, why you've changed, why you no longer show up in the same rooms. But that's because they weren't called to this level. You were, and with greater calling comes greater refinement, greater exposure to God, which sometimes means greater isolation from everything else. Don't fight the process. Don't rush the becoming. This interruption is sacred. This shaking is necessary. This season is holy ground, and only those who trust him in the dark will be trusted to lead in the light. There is something sacred about the way God disrupts our plans. He doesn't just step into our schedules, he dismantles them. He doesn't ask for our permission to shift us, he just moves. And in that movement, he brings a level of clarity that comfort could never produce. You may have had your life mapped out. You knew what the next step was. You had the relationship figured out. You were certain about your career path, your environment, your circle. But then suddenly, things started unraveling. Conversations got shorter. Opportunities dried up. The fire you once felt in places started to grow cold. And at first, you thought it was the enemy, that maybe you were under attack. But what if it wasn't the enemy at all? What if it was God shutting doors that no longer led to your destiny? This is what it feels like when heaven interrupts you. It doesn't come with a warning label or a soft landing. It comes with a tension in your spirit, a discomfort in the familiar, and a whisper in the silence that says, "This can't be it." God's interruption doesn't always make sense in the moment, but it's never without purpose. He sees what's ahead. He sees who you are when no one is watching. He sees the rooms you're meant to stand in and the chains you're called to break. And he knows that the current version of you can't carry what's coming unless some things are removed, rearranged, and refined. So he strips away the excess. He removes what you clung to out of fear. He exposes the areas of your life that have been operating on autopilot. You can't bring a diluted version of yourself into a divine assignment. You can't move forward while dragging old weight, and sometimes the weight isn't sin, it's safety. It's the emotional bubble wrap you used to survive, but now God is calling you to live. He's calling you to risk again, to believe again, to dream again. But in order to do that, he has to disturb your normal. When he interrupts you, he's not just changing your direction. He's redefining your identity. He's reminding you that you are not your job, not your relationship status, not your past mistakes, not the image you've maintained for acceptance. You are his chosen, called, anointed, and sometimes the interruption is the only way to get you to see yourself correctly. You've been walking with labels life placed on you, but God is removing every false identity. He's interrupting the lie that told you you're not enough. He's silencing the voice that told you your failure disqualified you. He's confronting the trauma that convinced you to play small, because the calling on your life is too great for you to keep hiding behind brokenness. And yes, healing is part of the interruption. God doesn't send broken vessels to do whole work. So before he sends you, he'll heal you. Not just on the surface, not just what people can see, but deep down. The places you never talk about, the wounds you've normalized, the cycles you've called personality when really they're just unprocessed pain. That's the work he does in the middle of the interruption. It's not punishment, it's purification. He's making sure that when you speak, it's from a place of wholeness. That when you lead, it's not from ego, but from surrender. That when you move, it's not out of reaction, but from revelation. The interruption also reveals your idols, the things you put before him, even unknowingly, the way you needed approval, the way you worshipped productivity, the way you depended on relationships to give you value. God loves you too much to let you elevate anything above him, so he interrupts what's been quietly taking his place in your heart, not to hurt you, but to center you. He wants to be the foundation again. He wants to be your source, your peace, your affirmation, and he'll use the interruption to bring you back into alignment. You won't always feel strong in the interruption. In fact, you'll feel incredibly fragile. That's by design, because God does his greatest building when you finally admit that you can't do it without him. When you stop striving and start surrendering. When you stop pretending and start praying from the place of truth. This is where he meets you, and the breaking, this is where he whispers direction, and the silence after the storm, this is where purpose is conceived, and the tension between who you were and who you're becoming. People may not understand why you've gone quiet, why you're no longer available in the same way, why you seem distant, but that's what happens when you're in the in-between. You're not who you used to be, and you're not yet who you're becoming. You're in the process, and the process demands privacy. Not everyone can walk with you through this part. Not everyone can understand the shedding, the crying, the isolation, but those are the very tools God uses to refine you. He's developing your discernment. He's sharpening your vision. He's softening your heart, and he's preparing you for the weight of the assignment you're about to carry. The version of you that's emerging is going to look unfamiliar to people who only knew you in survival. They won't recognize your authority because they only knew your insecurity, but that's okay because you're not being raised for applause. You're being raised for impact, for kingdom work, for generational shift. For cycles to break when you open your mouth, and none of that could happen without the interruption. The interruption was never meant to destroy you. It was designed to deliver you. Everything God disrupted, delayed, or dismantled was preparation. Before he could send you into purpose, he had to break the patterns that were keeping you bound. He had to stretch your faith, strengthen your identity, and strip away everything that was blocking your capacity. You were never being punished. You were being positioned. God interrupted your plans so he could introduce you to his. What felt like loss was really alignment. What seemed like silence was training, and what broke you was building you for a greater weight of glory. You're not going back to who you were, because that version of you wasn't equipped to carry the anointing that's now resting on your life. This interruption was sacred. It was the birthing ground of your next level. And now you're not just being sent, you're being released, with clarity, with authority, and with heaven's backing.